China.
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 China. China.
China.
China.
China.
There are companies in China right now paying people to show up to jobs that don't exist. Not layoffs, not furloughs, fake jobs. Desks, badges, a paycheck. Created for one reason. So the unemployment number stays low enough that nobody asks the real question. This is the China you're used to seeing. Biggest exporter on earth. Second largest economy in the world. A trade surplus larger than any country has ever posted in history. And underneath all of it, a collapse, happening so slowly, so quietly, most people won't notice until it's already reshaped the country.
The world's largest economy to the world's second largest, China. It grew at one of its slowest rates in the last decade.
China, which is in the midst of a broader economic slowdown.
Chinese population has declined for the first time in decades.
This isn't a story about China falling apart overnight. It's stranger than that. It's a story about a superpower that looks stronger every year on paper, while the foundation underneath it gets quieter, weaker, and further from anyone in charge. Let's start with the version of China most of the world sees. A $20 trillion economy, second only to the United States. Export numbers hitting records month after month. More steel, cars, solar panels, and batteries produced than any other nation on the planet by a wide margin. Officially, growth is holding around the government's target. Officially, unemployment is under control. Officially, this is a country executing a long-term plan flawlessly. But almost everyone actually watching the numbers up close, economists, investors, even officials inside the system, will tell you a different story off the record. A story where the headline growth is real.
China reports its slowest growth rate for nearly 3 decades.
The trade war with America.
What does it mean for the rest of the world?
China has been the economic miracle of recent decades.
But it's covering for something underneath that isn't holding together nearly as well. That gap between the number on the press release and the reality on the ground is where this video lives. Here's the part almost nobody outside China fully grasps. Between 2006 and 2020, roughly half of every new home built on Earth was built in China. Not half of China's homes, half of the entire planet's new residential construction in one country. That wasn't really about housing people. It was about growth. Real estate became the engine that powered everything else. Steel demand, cement, construction jobs, local government budgets, and household wealth. Because for most Chinese families, their apartment wasn't just a home. It was their retirement plan, their savings account, and their children's inheritance, all wrapped into one asset. That asset has been losing value for 6 straight years now. In some major cities, prices have fallen back to where they were 2 decades ago, erasing not just recent gains, but an entire generation's worth of accumulated wealth, on paper, almost overnight. And because property touched everything, local government revenue from land sales, construction employment, household confidence, the slowdown didn't stay contained. It rippled outward into nearly every part of the economy that depended on it. Which brings us to the part of this story that's much harder to see from the outside, because it's not happening in a market you can chart. It's happening inside a workforce. Every year, China now produces more university graduates than almost any country in history has in a single year. Well over 10 million young, educated people entering the job market at once. Officially, youth unemployment sits in the high teens. Bad, but not catastrophic.
Really quite disconcerting was the youth unemployment figure. It hit a fresh record of 20.8%. for May.
That's up from 20.4 the prior month. This is the age category from people 16 to 24, about 96 million people, the Statistics Bureau said. 6 million of those are still looking for jobs.
Unofficially, independent economists and even some Chinese researchers who've studied the numbers closely have put the real figure dramatically higher.
Labor market transformation could have impacted the recent youth unemployment rate in China, and also the way the Chinese government has been regulating some of the sectors that I studied, including the high-tech sector, could have really serious impacts on the unemployment situation today.
My understanding is there just aren't the same level of jobs that require a college degree. So there's this imbalance in terms of supply and demand, and then that's made even worse.
Once you count people who've simply stopped looking, or who are technically employed in jobs that barely exist, that's where the fake jobs come back in. Reports have surfaced of companies, some state-linked, some private, creating positions with no meaningful workload, just to keep someone's name on a payroll instead of an unemployment line. It's a strange kind of theater. Everyone in the room knows the job isn't real, but everyone keeps showing up, because the alternative, being counted as jobless in a country where that number is politically sensitive, is worse. Picture spending 4 years and your family's savings on a degree, only to graduate into a market where the honest job either doesn't exist or pays less than what your parents earned without one. For a huge number of young Chinese right now, that's not a hypothetical. That's reality. And that reality has produced something the government did not plan for and can't easily fix with a stimulus package. There's a phrase that spread across Chinese social media over the past few years: Tang Ping, lying flat. It started as a kind of quiet protest. Not marches, not petitions, just millions of young people deciding, individually, to opt out. No overtime, chasing promotions, or buying a home you can't really afford. No marriage or kids, if that's what it takes to lower the pressure. Just the minimum needed to get by. To understand why that's such a big deal, you have to understand what it's replacing. For decades, the deal in China was simple, and it was everywhere. In schools, in state media, in family expectations. Work harder than anyone else, and you'll have a better life than your parents did. Grind now, so your kids won't have to. That deal built the China the world sees today, and for a long time it worked. Enough people believed it, and enough people saw it pay off, that the whole system ran on that belief. But an entire generation is now looking at that deal and quietly deciding it isn't worth it anymore. Not because they're lazy. The lying flat generation includes some of the most educated young people China has ever produced. Because the math stopped working. Property prices outran wages years ago. Good jobs are scarcer than the degrees chasing them. And the sacrifice their parents made, the 60-hour weeks, the deferred everything, doesn't look like it's buying the same future anymore. When a country's youngest, most capable generation starts quietly opting out of the system that built the country, that's not a headline. There's no press conference for it. It doesn't show up cleanly in GDP. But it might be the most important thing happening in China right now. Because an economy doesn't just run on capital and factories. It runs on people who still believe showing up is worth it. And that belief is the thing that's quietly eroding. Now here's where it gets genuinely dangerous, in a very traditional economic sense. Local governments in China took on enormous debt over the past 2 decades, much of it to fund the infrastructure and land deals tied to that property boom we talked about earlier.
How infrastructure spending is affecting China's economy.
China will move into a more service economy gradually.
How much more momentum is there in terms of government-mandated infrastructure spending.
Time when economy is facing downside risks, infrastructure is becoming important again.
Official figures on that debt are large. But officials and economists widely agree the real number is much bigger, because a huge portion sits in off-the-books financing vehicles that don't show up on any public balance sheet. Nobody, not outside analysts, arguably not even Beijing itself with total precision, knows exactly how large that hidden debt really is. Layer on top of that a second problem: deflation.
China's economy is suffering from the opposite, deflation. Consumer prices declined in July for the first time in more than 2 years. People and businesses are not spending, and the world's second largest economy is struggling.
Prices in China have been flat or falling for years now, which sounds harmless, even good, until you remember what falling prices usually mean. Consumers waiting to spend because things might be cheaper tomorrow. Businesses cutting wages and jobs because they can't raise prices to cover costs. A slow motion spiral that's much harder to break than ordinary inflation. A property crash. Hidden local debt. Years of deflation. Each one on its own is manageable. Stacked together in a country of this size, that combination has historically been the recipe for the kind of crisis that takes a decade to fully play out. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. Almost everything we just walked through relies on numbers. And in China, the same government under pressure to show strength is also the government that produces the statistics measuring that strength. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's an openly acknowledged problem among economists who study China professionally. Independent researchers, foreign institutions, and even some Chinese academics have repeatedly estimated real figures on unemployment, on GDP, on debt, that diverge sharply from the official releases, sometimes by a little, sometimes by a staggering amount. So what do you actually believe? The honest answer is probably somewhere in between the official number and the most alarming independent estimate. But nobody outside a very small circle actually knows for certain. And that uncertainty is itself the story. A country this size, this powerful, this important to the global economy, and the rest of the world is left reading tea leaves to guess how bad things really are underneath the surface. That's not a side note. That's the whole problem, condensed into one sentence. Which brings us to the one part of this story that isn't up for debate, because you can't fake a birth rate. China's population is shrinking. Marriage rates have fallen for years running, and decades of the one-child policy left a demographic shape that no incentive program, cash bonuses, tax breaks, propaganda campaigns, has been able to meaningfully reverse. Because the people who would have had those children were never born in the first place. Every problem in this video, the property bubble, the fake jobs, lying flat, the hidden debt, is a crisis that in theory could still be managed with the right policy, the right decade, the right leadership. The demographic curve can't be managed. It can only be lived through. That's what makes this collapse quiet instead of loud. There's no single crash, no single headline morning where everyone wakes up and says, "Today is the day." Just a slow accumulation. An empty apartment here, a fake job there, a generation that quietly stops trying as hard as the one before it. Multiply that by over 1 billion people and a few decades, and you don't get an explosion, you get an erosion. China isn't collapsing the way headlines like to describe collapse. No single crash, no single day everyone will point to. It's something slower, and in some ways harder to fix. A quiet mismatch between the story a country tells about itself and the one its own people are living underneath it. What happens next, whether this becomes a decade-long correction or something the country actually manages its way through, is genuinely one of the biggest open questions in the world economy right now. What do you think happens next? Let me know in the comments. And if this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.